You are listening to the RAMA Blueprints podcast, Extra Bio, Jean Royale. In this extra, we talk with Jean Royale, one of the original Real Alternatives program employees and retired San Francisco State University professor, where he helped found the Cesar E. Chavez Institute. In the early 1970s, he founded Centro de Cambio, an outpatient drug treatment program serving the youth and families of the Mission District. He was instrumental in negotiating and advocating for many community projects, including the development and founding of the Real Alternatives Program High School, San Francisco Unified School District's wellness centers, and the building of low-income housing. As a long-time community activist and consultant, Jean wore many hats and worked for many causes, including the United Farm Workers. Jean Royale passed away in Hanford, California on September 27, 2024. So Jean, thank you for being with us today. I have a very broad question. What was your journey in getting connected to community work? How did it come about for you?
Well, I was at State. I was recruited from Presida Park, and I went to State, and I started to work with the student organizations there. I got involved in the South Market during the time that they were doing evictions, and I started to work as an organizer over the years there. Then I met Jim Queen, and he convinced me that because I was raised in Mission and Bernal Heights, I should come and work with him at RAP. And I did that.
And what year what year is this?
1968, 69.
Okay, great. Mm-hmm. So it's 1968. You're working in the community. And tell us a little bit about that experience and how you then begin to evolve in your own development as a community organizer.
Well, to tell you the truth, early on, there were two women, Liz Finn and Judy, I can't remember her last name. She was a social worker in San Francisco, and Liz had a newsletter that she put out, a progressive newsletter. Mm-hmm. And I joined with them, or they took me under their wing, and I worked with something called Tenants and Owners in Opposition to Redevelopment in the South Market. And I think I got my basic education in organizing here. Then when I got to RAP, there was already Ray Rivera, Tom Quinn, and Jim were the leadership. Georgia Quinones, who was at that time with Verizon Unlimited. Jim had EMUNYO. A number of our students from the Raza studies at State started to work there. Myself, Fernando Cosillo, a number of us. Jim came to us one day and said, I worked this deal with Vista volunteers, and it'd be the first Vista volunteers to work in their own community and, get paid. So I became a full-time community organizer as a Vista volunteer. When they moved to Guerrero Street with RAP, I focused a lot on kids and drugs and families. And over the years developed, I guess, a skill to understand that network and how it worked in San Francisco. And I spun off with him, and I decided I should kind of do an independent thing on drugs. Mm-hmm. And so came another social worker named Bob Hernandez, who was a social worker in the Mission. We designed Centro de Cambio. We actually called it the Center of Change, but in Spanish, it's Centro de Cambio. So we found a spot on 24th and Harrison and started a drug program connected very closely with RAP.
And that partnership, that connection that happened with Centro de Cambio, was a result of that there was a huge amount of drug abuse and substance abuses, and there wasn't adequate needs being met. Can you talk a little bit about what were some of the program goals and philosophy of Centro de Cambio?
We were basically reading the Red Book at the time and very involved kind of that point of view. And that was very compatible with Jim's really strong concept of community independence. The program was not as much any form of medical treatment as much as it was a philosophy, and that is drug abuse was socially caused, that the best way to deal with it is to make drug addicts organizers, and it changes their view, as opposed to other programs that looked at changing the individual. We saw changing the point of view of the individual, and by that, leaving drug abuse, which we saw as a symptom, not a disease. So that was the philosophy. Mostly what we were dealing with teenagers was Seconal, Reds. And you might have heard the poem, Blame It on the Reds with Berto Vargas. That was a lot of what the philosophy of Centro was. So Seconal, and then on Friday and Saturday nights, alcohol. They don't mix good. And we work with the rap band. That's maybe when it conceived. But we used to drive around on Friday and Saturday nights, pick up kids who were overdosed or really messed up, bring them to Central. We stay open all night. And we had volunteer doctors from San Francisco General that would give them IPCAP, which made them throw up. You know, we had a party going on of kids being sick in one room and then just hanging out in the other, coming off Seconal. And then what we would do was connect with their families. We'd get to know them, bring in their families, talk about it, and then do the process of basically political education. We looked at it, what we saw as dialectical materialism, but was really 4 steps. One was to show the family the contradiction in the community in various forms, money, whatever they were going through. Second, we would connect that with the idea of organizing, bringing families together that had the same issues. Then we would gradually see changes in the kids and sometimes the families. Sometimes it didn't work at all, but when it did, that was our goal. And in the end, we tried to connect them with things like the MCO committees to start working on issues. And so jobs, of course, many of the young people wanted jobs. You might have heard about a strike at Sears where we picketed. Well, that was a lot of the kids and families. We were working with both at RAP and Central. And we were pretty close to Mission Coalition. So we did that for a number of years with youth. On the other side, the adult heroin. There was a lawyer named Bruce Plumber who worked for RAP, and we brought him on at Central full time, put him in a little room and said, your job is to defend heroin addicts. And so we bring in heroin addicts who all had criminal shit going on, and we would basically advise them legally through Bruce. And then Bruce would go to court and deal with their cases. And at that time, we had their attention, so we talked a lot to them. Many of them had families. We brought the families in. The idea there is the third step is that they identify, as opposed to the problem of drug addiction, they identified the social problem that they were involved with and how it was a political issue as opposed to a disease. Much like RAP did at YGC with Ray. We focused mostly on providing them the service of court representation. And for that, they kind of went through the same process as youth, where we tried to encourage them to participate in community organizing.
Wow, that's intense. I'm interested in exploring a little bit more about, as Centro de Cambio evolves as an organization, what are the next steps around Centro de Cambio and how does it continue to collaborate with RAP?
In common, Jim and I and those of us around then did not want to deal with public funds, with government funds. Okay. We wanted complete independence. And at that time, the San Francisco Foundation and other groups saw us, I don't know, maybe as novelties, but they gave us complete carte blanche. We had no training, but they trusted that what we wanted to do was sincere. And that's, I think, the basis of the money that they would give us to organize. And remember, we were all very satisfied with a salary of $500 a month because rent was low. We were basically living communally. So the cost of running a program was significantly lower. My time with Centro, I could be anti-police. I could support candidates. I could do all of that. And we felt that once you started taking federal money or state money, that left. So when police would come to us and want to know who our clients were, we could give them a little box that had numbers, and that's how we identified people. We did not use names in the written material. So that's what we were doing. We were resisting taking federal funds. And up until the time that I left to become staff director for MCO, that's pretty much my involvement. After that, Centro did accept federal funds and ran a halfway house on Dolores Street. And it changed in that, where you had to give up a lot of information to get services. And I didn't like that. And I didn't really want to get involved with federal dollars.
Well, if we recall our brother Mitchell Salazar, right? When people would question where money was coming from, and Mitch would always say, all money's dirty, Socorro, right? And so I think that taking that political stance, taking that stance of integrity back then is huge, Gene. So I appreciate you and those others that took that stance during that time.
But remember, it cost nothing to live then.
Yes.
I mean, really, we lived on what we had, and in retrospect, probably couldn't be replicated that way.
So you go to MCO, you start working as you mentioned, the staff director there. What are some of the highlights of being with MCO? And then how do you circle back to RAP?
Okay, well, MCO, while I was at Centro de Cambio, I became the chairman of the health committee of the Mission Coalition.
Okay.
And there were, I'm not sure, maybe 12 committees. And they were basically organizing groups. We'd meet once, twice a week. We'd take up issues. We'd approach, in my case, the health department, and basically organize around that issue. Did that for a couple of years, and then became very close to Ben Martinez, who was the chair or director of MCO, the chief organizer, and a guy named Mike Miller. I basically was trained in that kind of mass-based organizing. It was an Olinsky model. The Los Siete group was not willing to participate in, I guess, what they considered democratic, because we were connected to the Democratic Party. MCO goes on to become a very powerful organization. RAP was a member of MCO, as well as 150 other organizations. Of course, RAP became in charge of the youth organizing. So Jim's at the table, I'm at the table. Rich Soro became the chair of the employment committee. He's at the table. Larry, who's from Ralph Park. And so there's a number of us who become trained and work in organizing through the MCO. We could turn out, I don't know, 200 people on Saturday morning in front of a landlord's house. When I go into Los Jarritos, there's a picture of this viejito and his wife above the counters. Do you remember that? Or
yeah, I've seen that picture. I've seen that picture, yes.
That was Senor Padilla. He was a Spanish-speaking chairman of the employment committee, and he was a very powerful organizer in MCO. His family knows our connection to MCO, but there's a lot of roots there. So MCO goes on. At one point, Ben, who rode a motorcycle, got in an accident and was disabled for a while. That's when they came to me at Centro and asked if I would take over as organizing staff director. And I agreed. at the same time, I'm at State, and I guess I got psychology because of Central, and it was a natural fit because at that time, State was very laid back. I could be in psychology and ethnic studies and community, and it was kind of like a natural way of being there. That's what I did every day. So it flowed very easily. And I guess I remember leaving for a while. I went to UC Santa Cruz for my PhD. And when I came back, Mitch, Roberto, and Sam Ruiz said, Gene, you have to come with us. I said, what's this? They take me to Stanford to some training program for community leaders. And it was exactly what I didn't want to be part of, which how to be a businessman. You know, the model of community self-determination that we had. And I guess I left when I went to Santa Cruz. And when I came back, it was how to get the money to do what you want to do. And it was the acceptance of corporate and federal dollars. And so I didn't participate in that very much until I met Mitch. And he came out to State and we became very close over the years, collaborating. What he told me was he'd been given this contract for a rap school, and it was in a playground on Mission Street on 16th Mission and in a bungalow. And he took me there, and I forgot the Filipino sister.
Holly Galita.
Yeah, she was basically almost in tears because they gave her a classroom with ninth graders and 12th graders all mixed together. And they just said, teach with no curriculum, nothing. So what I got involved with was the idea of putting that into a contextual plan by which you could actually do a school, like demanding that ninth graders have a ninth grade class. Through that and the charisma of Mitch, we became very close to the then superintendent of education, Cortinas. He'd call us at 7 a.m, come down to the office. Mitch and I would go in. He'd say, what do you guys need? You know, he would provide various buses or whatever we would need. He would cut all the red tape. Then one day he said, I want you guys to come with me over to this school, Sunshine School on Bryant Street. He takes us up on the second floor, whatever it was. And he says, what if we gave you this as a place to have your school? And that was pretty cool. And then Mitch put together you guys. You all started coming, teachers, counselors. The rap concept became part of a school, and it was great. Yeah. And so my involvement there was in helping Mitch design for a school and to move and work with Cortinas. After that, our relationship was with Rojas, next superintendent. He didn't exactly understand what we were doing, but he was an excellent, I think the best superintendent we've had, and had the right idea about what was wrong with schools. And that became another issue we dealt with.
As you're speaking, I'm remembering a conversation with Superintendent Rojas as we were doing the planning to transition into a 4-year program. And he says to Mitch, don't tell me what you're going to do. Tell me how you're going to do it. Because he understood the model, but he knew there was challenges within the school district with other programs and other schools. And so he had seen the results and the behaviors were changing and different things were going on, as well as motivating young people to go to school. Gene, how then do you get connected to Step to College? How does that come about that you begin to do that?
Well, you know, I'm at State and I was director of student affirmative action at the time. And I taught organizing. So I had a lot of students who didn't know community, but they wanted to. So we gave them the opportunity to work at school under Mitch. And that worked out really well. But Jake Perea was then the chair of education at State. And he had a program called Step to College. And so that's pretty open admission, much like I went to college. I was sitting seat apart. And a guy named Roger Alvarado said, "You want to go to college?" I didn't really, but I signed on with him because we got financial aid. There was no tests, no paperwork, nothing. And that was, for many of us in the early 60s, that was our admission process. Step to College was trying to take those barriers away also and admit primarily Latino students into the university. And once they got there, we had to construct through student affirmative action the retention of those students, because it was like, you could go in, but 6 months later, they're gone. Nobody looked for them unless they got into ethnic studies and were lucky enough. It was very difficult. So when we did student affirmative action at that level, we were trying to retain those students. And then at a later point, we wanted to graduate them, and it progressively got tighter over the years.
Correct. And one of the outcomes and one of the accomplishments of that program is Dr. Aisha Beliso. And Aisha, being a student at RAP school who was involved in the Step to College program, actually scored, then Step to College, and then eventually getting into state, transferring to Stanford, eventually becoming a professor. Eventually now she's at Princeton and coming out of that program. And so when I think about how the Step to College staff worked with her and created that opportunity, it's a direct result to seeing and actualizing the RAP program goals and philosophy of youth for self-determination. So all this time, you're continuing to work in education, and I begin to see your involvement progress with RAP even more as the development of the Community Peace Initiative. A lot of folks have asked us about these initiatives that RAP was involved with. The Community Peace Initiative is what is now called the Mission Peace Collaborative, the Mission Peace Plan. So they've evolved. It's changed into a name. So just briefly touch on your connection and involvement with the design of the Community Peace Initiative and some of the program goals and objectives of that.
Well, that was a meeting with Mitch and I in my own office at home, which we did quite often. There was a lot of youth violence going on, and he was very involved in that with you and RAP and everything. And he said, "I want to do something." Well, at the same time, I was working in organizational psychology with a model called the linking pin model. And Mitch and I used to draw these circles, and we started to put names in them, or people, institutions, departments, city departments, and it fit perfectly. And Mitch took that model and reified it, made it real with people in the slots. And it was a great experience when you'd go to a meeting with almost every director of a city department talking about youth violence, along with every CBO. But it started in the design, and it's one of the things Mitch and I shared a lot of love about, was that experience of designing that thing that became the Community Peace Initiative, and you and a number of other people who were involved in that.
I think you get a lot of new generation leaders, right? Young people that are sitting in roles, not having a perspective or having a slight understanding of the work, the foundation, the groundbreaking work that was being done, like you said, and others have said, without federal dollars, without public funding. Obviously, today, it's very difficult to do that. But at the same time, what it took, and when I think of the Community Peace Initiative and the expansiveness of that model, and when we are exploring the story of RAP, what we're comparing it to is to a tree and the branches that begin to grow further and further out. And not only to focus on the mission community, but to focus on other neighborhoods and creating those same type of services or access to services where people feel empowered and people feel that they have the right to have just as much as everybody else. And I think the Community Peace Initiative did that for a lot of folks, and holding the city accountable.
The same philosophy of organizing, Mitch had it naturally in his brain. I mean, he understood the organizing part of it and pulling that together. And then many of us, yourself involved with a social justice point of view, made it very consistent from the day one with RAP. And we see MCO as that same vision, and the Community Peace Initiative has the same vision theoretically. But it took people to actually do it to make it real. And I succeeded in that. And the different evolution of those things, I'm sure, have at the root the ideas that were involved in the first days of rap.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you making that comparison because it's extremely important to see where it generated its roots. When you go back to EMUNYO, to rap, you can talk about all the organizations that were in the mission, and out of MCO, all the different things that have happened. Obviously, it is evolved into what it is now, and where you have these larger collaborations, but coming out of that work of people working together for the greater good and the common goal, but with the social justice priority in the beginning of it, whether it be mental health, whether it be youth organizing, jobs, housing. I know you worked with the CPI model, and RAP closes in 1999. And what happens, and where did you eventually go to once all that started to transition? Where does your journey take you?
Well, probably into academia. Once I did student affirmative action, I went back to teaching, and then I retired. And when hired, I spent most of my time with Mitch. If there was organizing going on, it was in support of Mitch and what he was doing. But I went to work first for Rojas, who was then superintendent of education. And he brought me and Larry Del Carlo together. And he said, we want you to take over this program called School to Work. So we started that department within the school district. And we had to convince old shop teachers that we had to do it different. It wasn't just shop to learn how to make a cabinet. You teach that, but your students get to work in a real live setting where they make cabinets and make some connection with the workforce. Well, a lot of the old timers didn't see that. They liked what they did. And the political tension was to support Rojas and him supporting us in changing the thinking of many teachers in schools that you need to connect the academic with the work world. We worked for about 5 years on that project. It became institutionalized eventually in the school. And even my daughter, who's a teacher in the school now, they look at it as a natural process. But at the time, it didn't exist.
Correct. I think that's around the time where we were starting to hear workforce development within the schools. And I remember you and Larry leading that charge and dibbling and dabbling a little bit with all the community programs. I think as organizations like Mission Neighborhood Centers and folks hearing about that were saying, wait, how do we get some of our students enrolled in those classes that leads to a real job?
Everybody looks at it that way now, but it didn't then. After I worked with Larry for those years, Mitch and I hooked up again and went to work for the then very progressive district attorney, Terrence Hallinan.
That's correct.
And he brought us in and said, hey, you guys, remember, I'm the prosecutor. We said, well, yeah, we know. Yeah, but I need you to design a program that didn't send people to jail, on the first time or something. So Mitch and I worked for him for 3 or 4 years, putting together a diversion program. Terrence always wanted to remember that he was a prosecutor, not the defense. So the program had to look like a criminal justice program. So we designed a community courts for Terrence. And that was right up Mitch's alley because every home in the community would come to see him about closing their records and this and that. But I was much more in the design part of it, and Mitch was at a flow of homies that needed services. And Terrence was happy with what eventually became a community court that I guess still exists.
That's correct. After the community courts, you and Mitch continue to work together, or what happens?
Every year we did work with Eva with the parade.
The farm workers.
I would just want to see Mitch's work. When you guys were at RAP and he would call me, says, hey, Gene, I don't have the money for payroll coming up. Come with me. And I'd go with him. And he'd take me over to some crazy place, in this case, Tiburon. And he says, we're going to meet with this guy who's the vice president of Charles Schwab and have lunch at his house. We get to his house. He has 2 gigantic houses in Tiburon on hills. And he says, one's my office, the other's my house. Where do you want to have lunch? Holy shit. So we go in there. I don't know what to expect. And out of the blue, Mitch says, I'm not making payroll and I need you to give me $5,000. And I would watch the executive just believe Mitch and say, not again, and write the check. And that sure was different than federal fund. I've never seen another organizer that had that kind of charisma. After appearance, I retired and we were friends for many years after that.
First of all, I want to thank you for, in a lot of ways, setting the record straight in regards to conversations and your accounting of the history of the Centro de Cambio's work and also the collaboration with RAP. And in particular, the CPI work. A lot of folks have this idea that it was a one-man show, a one-person show, but there were so many moving parts to the RAP organization, and in particular, the development and the evolvement of it, and the contacts and the connections and the networking. And I know, Jean, you were instrumental in so many facets, in so many ways. I want to personally thank you for always sticking through it and doing what you did, and your wisdom, your leadership, the organizing that you did, and the community contact, keeping the community connected to education, and the strength and work that you pulled together, especially with School to Work. There is one of the RAP philosophies, deinstitutionalize the institution by any means necessary in some way, right? Infiltrate those walls, get inside, and create the change for our community. And I think you were one of those change agents. Santiago Ruiz talks about, we weren't just organizers, we were change agents. And I believe you were one of those individuals. Is there anything you'd like to say in regards to the impact that you had in connection with RAP and what it meant to you? This would be like a final thought that you might want to leave for people to hear.
What I think about more than anything is to look at what's going on today. I'm proud to see all the work that, from my point of view, spun off that work. But I was lucky enough to come up at a time when I could take that time. I didn't need that money because it wasn't what it is today. And I love all the people that got into that kind of work for the right reasons and make it a career. And even if they don't know it, often the philosophy of RAP is what started it all. The last job that I really did in the community with Larry kind of took it another step. Larry says, look, there's a developer that wants to develop the building on 16th and Mission, and he wants community benefits involved. Can we design a program to do that? So we did, and it backfired. In the beginning with RAP, there was the RAP philosophy, and then there was the Los Siete philosophy. And the Los Siete philosophy was pick up the gun and revolution in that way. Ours was more, again, a dialectical materialist view, to view the contradiction and deal with it in the real world. And the organizing that was not connected to RAP, I saw evolve into not sure how to explain it, but they completely rejected the idea of community involvement in the development of a real thing. We worked there for 4 years, built a community organization, and basically the anti-development group was much more for the revolution than for the kind of change that RAP meant, that MCO meant. And so I'm not sure where it is now, but I think there were flaws in the model in respect to different organizing strategies and how they evolved. So my last experience told me it's time to kind of hang up the boots because maybe they don't want to organize that way anymore. I'm not sure where it is. But really good people like Sam disagreed with the model of community working with the institutions in designing something viable. CPI was different. It saw bringing in institutions, working with them, and evolving something that would benefit community. And in the last effort, my plan didn't work.
Well, I'll tell you, there's a lot of full circles and experiences that we have. And I think part of the purpose of the podcast is to get that perspective out there. I think at one point, this new generation of leaders might run into a very similar wall and will reflect and think, well, how do we do it differently? I appreciate the work. I appreciate the history, and I thank you for your work. And again, thank you for your time. And we were talking with Jean Royale, former community organizer, Centro de Cambio founder, activist, and also educator, academia at San Francisco State, all around progressive change agent in the development of the mission community's activism. Thank you, Jean, for your time.
Thank you.
This concludes this episode. Thank you for listening to this extra. We dedicate this episode con todo corazón to La Familia Royale. We also thank our sister organizations for their sponsorship and support. CARECEN SF, Instituto Familiar de la Raza, Horizons Unlimited, SALT, Vasa Community, United Players, and Brava Women for the Arts. And a special thanks to all of our dedicated community listeners and individual donors for their ongoing support. Our theme song was written and performed by Orlando Toriente and Lolo. This episode was produced and edited by Darren J. De Leon and Socorro Gamboa for the Five Sisters Audio Garden. Please consider donating to RAMA Blueprints at the CARECENSF.org website or the link in the description. Please subscribe to our podcast and share it with 2 people. You can hear archive episodes of RAMA Blueprints wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Thank you for listening. And remember, to listen is to heal. All power to the people.